Ethan Hale had lived most of his life on the same old ranch that his father built many years ago. The land stretched far into the open fields, with tall grass fluttering in the wind and horses running freely in the distance. For most people, the ranch looked peaceful. For Ethan, it was also the safest place he knew. He liked the quiet mornings, the sound of cows in the distance, and the familiar creaking of the wooden porch. He didn't have many friends, and he didn't go to town unless he needed supplies. His life was simple, and he preferred it that way. Every sunrise followed the same routine. He would feed the animals, clean the stables, repair old fences, and sit alone on the porch with a warm cup of tea. He never thought he needed more than that. The loneliness didn't scare him, people did. He was shy in a way that most people never understood. Talking to strangers made his heart race, and he avoided conversations whenever possible. But everything changed one late afternoon when he heard the sound of approaching footsteps on the gravel road. It was unusual. No one visited the ranch without calling first. Ethan set down the tools in his hand and turned toward the sound. His heart beat a little faster when he saw a tall woman slowly making her way toward the gate. She walked heavily, as if each step took effort. Her clothes were dusty, and a backpack hung from her shoulder. Her hair was messy, pushed back in a loose braid, and her face looked tired, like someone who hadn't slept peacefully in weeks. Ethan swallowed nervously. He wasn't sure what to say or do. Should he call out to her? Should he wait? His body froze from shyness. When she finally reached him, she stopped, breathing heavily. "Hi. I'm sorry to bother you," she said gently. Her voice was deep but soft, carrying a tired sadness that immediately caught Ethan's attention. "My name is Mara. I'm looking for a place to stay for a few days. I can work too. I just need a little time to rest." Ethan blinked in surprise. He wasn't used to strangers asking for shelter, especially not someone like her, someone tall, strong-looking, and confident enough to walk up to a remote ranch. He didn't mean to stare, but he couldn't help noticing how exhausted she looked. Her shoulders drooped as if she had been carrying more than just her backpack. I'm not sure," Ethan mumbled, rubbing the back of his neck. His words felt tangled. "I don't usually, have guests." "I understand," Mara replied with a gentle nod. "I just didn't know where else to go. I've been traveling for days." She hesitated before adding, "I lost my husband a few months ago. Everything changed after that. I needed to get away from the noise and the memories. I don't want to trouble you. I just need a quiet place for a while." Her honesty surprised him. Most people didn't open up so quickly, especially to strangers. Ethan felt a mix of sympathy and nervousness. He wasn't good at comforting people, but he could see how much she needed rest. After a long moment of silent thinking, he took a deep breath. "There's a small cabin behind the barn. It's old, but clean. You can stay there for a few days." Mara let out a breath of relief, and her eyes softened. "Thank you, really. I appreciate it." He nodded, trying not to show how awkward he felt. As she followed him toward the cabin, Ethan kept a small distance. She walked slower now, looking around the ranch with quiet curiosity. The horses neighed softly as they passed, and she smiled at them, as if their presence brought her a bit of comfort. When they reached the cabin, Ethan opened the door for her. Dust floated in the sunlight, but the room was neat. A small bed, a table, and a chair were the only pieces of furniture. It wasn't much, but she smiled warmly. "It's perfect," she said. "I'll only stay a short while." Amma. "You can stay as long as you need," Ethan said before he realized what he had said. His face grew warm. He didn't usually speak without thinking. Mara noticed, but didn't comment. She simply nodded. "Thank you." He stepped back, unsure of what else to say. "I'll bring some blankets." "And water." "You're very kind," she replied gently. Ethan hurried away, embarrassed by the way her words made his chest feel tighter. He didn't think of himself as kind. He just didn't like seeing someone so worn out. After bringing the blankets and water, he left her alone to rest. For the rest of the evening, Ethan tried to work like usual, but his mind wandered. He wondered where she came from, what happened to her husband, and why she chose this ranch out of all places. The thought of someone else staying on his land made him nervous, but also, strangely, not lonely. As night fell, he sat on the porch again, staring at the stars. He could hear the faint sound of Mara moving in the cabin, settling in. It was unusual to hear another human presence so close. The ranch felt different, less empty, but also unpredictable. He didn't know much about widows or grief, but he could feel the heaviness she carried. The kind that made a person walk slowly, as if the world weighed on their shoulders. Ethan felt a quiet respect for her. She seemed strong, yet deeply hurt. The next morning, Ethan expected to see the cabin still quiet. But when he stepped outside, he saw Mara already awake, brushing the horses near the fence. She moved with surprising strength, lifting a heavy bucket of water like it weighed nothing. "You don't have to do that," Ethan said softly as he approached. "I know," she replied with a small smile. "But working helps me think less. And your horses are beautiful." He didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded. He noticed how she interacted with the animals, calm, gentle, understanding. The horses, usually cautious around strangers, were already comfortable with her. That impressed Ethan more than he expected. Throughout the morning, Mara helped with simple tasks, carrying hay, cleaning stalls, and organizing tools. Ethan tried to tell her she didn't need to help, but every time he spoke, she gently insisted, "I want to. It keeps my mind steady." He didn't argue again. Still, her presence disturbed his quiet world. She talked more than he was used to. She asked small questions about the ranch, about the horses, about the weather. Her voice filled the silence he once clung to. Yet strangely, he didn't dislike it. When she laughed, a deep, warm laugh, Ethan found himself staring for a moment too long. He quickly looked away, embarrassed. By afternoon, he noticed her sitting on a rock near the fence, staring at the open fields with a faraway expression. Her shoulders shook slightly, as if she was fighting tears. Ethan stood a few steps behind her, unsure if he should approach. But then he remembered her words about losing her husband. The weight of that kind of loss was something he couldn't imagine. He finally took a slow step closer. "Are you okay?" Mara wiped her eyes quickly and forced a smile. "Just remembering things. Grief comes like waves. Some days calm, some days strong." She looked at him gently. "I hope I'm not bothering you." "No," he said honestly. "You're not." She gave him a grateful nod. That evening, Ethan cooked a simple meal and brought a plate to her cabin. Mara looked surprised. "You didn't have to cook for me." "I made too much," he lied shyly. She smiled, accepting the plate. "Thank you. Really. You don't know how much this means." Ethan didn't reply. He just nodded and walked back to his house, feeling strangely warm inside. As the days passed, the ranch slowly began to feel different. Not in a bad way, but in a way Ethan wasn't used to. Mara's presence brought sound, movement, and unexpected conversations. She was like a sudden summer storm, strong, loud at times, unpredictable but somehow comforting. Ethan didn't realize it yet. But her arrival was the beginning of a change he never expected. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't truly alone. The next few days on the ranch felt different for Ethan in a way he struggled to understand. He had lived alone for so long that even the sound of another person's footsteps felt unusual. Yet Mara's presence didn't disturb him the way he thought it would. If anything, it made the mornings feel less empty. Ethan woke early as usual, but when he stepped outside on the fourth morning, he found Mara already awake, standing near the old fence with a bucket in her hands. The sky was still painted with soft pink light, and dew covered the grass. She looked peaceful, as if the open land gave her space to breathe. "You're up early," Ethan said quietly. She turned toward him, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Couldn't sleep," she said with a small smile. Working helps. Ethan nodded, unsure how to respond. He wasn't good at comforting people, but he admired her strength, physical and emotional. Even through her grief, she showed a determination he rarely saw in anyone. She carried the bucket toward the stable, and Ethan noticed how easily she lifted it. He had always struggled with that bucket when it was full, and here she was holding it with one hand like it weighed little. He tried not to stare, but it amazed him every time. "I hope you don't mind," she said, as she began brushing one of the horses. "I thought I would help before you started your chores." "You don't have to," he replied automatically. She smiled. "I know. But I want to." Those simple words made his chest feel warm. As they worked side by side, Ethan realized how quickly the horses had grown comfortable around her. Even Duke, the most stubborn horse on the ranch, allowed her to touch his mane. Ethan raised an eyebrow. He usually doesn't let anyone near him. Mara laughed softly. Animals understand pain better than humans sometimes. They can sense when someone is hurting. He glanced at her quietly. She glanced back, and for a moment, there was a heavy silence between them, not uncomfortable, just honest. Ethan wasn't good at talking about feelings, so he looked away and focused on the hay in his hands. By noon, the sun warmed the fields, and the chores were nearly done. They sat on a wooden bench near the barn, sharing cold water. Ethan didn't talk much, but Mara didn't seem to mind. She talked gently, sometimes recalling small memories of her past life, never too deeply, always careful. "I used to help my husband on our farm," she said, staring at the open land. "He was the one who taught me how to work with animals. We always believed fresh air could fix almost anything." Ethan listened quietly. He didn't know how to respond without saying the wrong thing, so he simply nodded. She didn't seem to expect more. In the following days, a strange routine formed between them. Mara woke early, worked hard, and spoke with honesty. Ethan tried to stay distant at first, but she pulled him into conversations without even trying. She asked simple questions that made him feel seen. "Do you like living alone? Are you always this quiet? What makes you happy on hard days?" He never had answers ready, but she waited patiently each time. One afternoon, while they were repairing a broken fence, Mara paused and looked around. "Your ranch is beautiful," she said. Ethan shrugged. "It's old. Old can be beautiful too," she replied warmly. Her words stayed in his mind long after she walked away. As the days passed, Ethan noticed something new. Mara worked harder than she needed to. She carried heavy logs, lifted hay bales, and fixed tools that hadn't been touched in years. Sometimes Ethan tried to stop her, gently telling her she didn't have to do so much, but she always answered with the same soft firmness. "It keeps me steady." Ethan could see what she meant. Working seemed to help her forget the heaviness inside her heart. He watched her from a distance sometimes, noticing how her shoulders relaxed when she focused on a task. She moved like someone who had been tired for too long but refused to give up. One afternoon, while Mara fed the horses, Ethan gathered the courage to speak. "You don't talk about him much," he said quietly. "Your husband." Mara stopped and leaned on the wooden railing. Her eyes softened with a mixture of sadness and warmth. "Talking makes it real," she whispered. "And some days, I'm not strong enough for that." Ethan lowered his gaze. "I understand." She looked at him with gentle appreciation. "You do? Most people tell me to move on or stay strong, but grief doesn't follow rules. I don't think pain works on a schedule," he replied softly. Mara gave him a grateful smile, and something shifted between them, a small trust. Fragile but real. Later that week, a small incident showed Ethan more about her than any conversation could. He was trying to move a sack of grain from the truck to the storage shed. Halfway through lifting it, his grip slipped. The heavy bag fell back, nearly landing on his foot. Before he could react, Mara rushed forward and grabbed it with one arm. "Careful," she said, her voice filled with worry. "You could have hurt yourself." I'm fine," Ethan stuttered, embarrassed. Mara set the sack down gently and raised an eyebrow. "Next time call me. I don't mind helping." Ethan flushed. He wasn't used to anyone worrying about him. He wasn't used to feeling cared for. The more time they spent together, the more Ethan noticed how Mara's presence changed the ranch. She laughed sometimes, filling the air with a warmth he didn't know he missed. When she hummed while working, the horses seemed calmer. Even the evenings were different. Instead of silent nights, there were small conversations, soft smiles, and gentle exchanges. One night, Ethan found her sitting on the porch of the cabin, looking up at the stars. He hesitated before walking closer. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. She shook her head. Sometimes the memories get loud. He didn't know what to say, so he sat beside her quietly. She didn't seem to mind. They sat under the open sky, listening to the distant sounds of crickets. After a long pause, Mara spoke in a whisper. "He was a good man, strong, gentle. Losing him felt like losing a part of myself." Ethan looked down at his hands, feeling her pain in her voice. "I'm sorry," he murmured. She nodded slowly. "Thank you." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was peaceful, two people carrying different kinds of loneliness, sitting close enough to feel less alone. As the days passed into weeks, Ethan realized something important. Mara didn't just help around the ranch. She helped him too. She talked enough to fill his silence without overwhelming him. She listened when he tried to speak, even if his words were slow. She encouraged him gently when he doubted himself. He found himself watching her from a distance, sometimes not out of curiosity, but admiration. She was strong, yet fragile. Brave, yet hurting. Even in her grief, she found ways to smile. One morning, after finishing the chores, she sat on a large rock near the field, resting. Ethan joined her quietly. "You work too hard," he said softly. She laughed. "And you worry too much." He smiled a small smile, but real. Mara looked at him thoughtfully. "You know, Ethan, you're different from most people." "Different how?" he asked, nervous. "You're gentle in a world that isn't always kind. You don't speak much, but when you do, your words feel honest." Ethan felt warmth spread across his chest. He looked away shyly, unsure how to handle compliments. Mara smiled at his reaction. From that day on, something subtle but steady began to grow between them. Not romance, not yet, but a quiet connection. Ethan didn't realize he had started looking forward to seeing her every morning. He didn't notice that his steps felt lighter or that he smiled more often, but he noticed her sadness lessening, slowly, little by little. She would still pause during work, staring at the horizon with distant eyes, remembering things she couldn't forget. But now, she had someone to sit with when the memories grew heavy. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Mara softly touched Ethan's arm. "Thank you," she said in a low voice. "For what?" he asked, confused. "For giving me space to heal. For not pushing me. For letting me be myself." Her words struck him deeply. He had never thought of himself as someone who could help another person heal. He simply lived quietly. But Mara saw something in him he never saw in himself. That night, Ethan lay in bed unable to sleep, thinking about everything that had changed since she arrived. The ranch didn't feel lonely anymore. The air felt warmer. The days felt fuller. He didn't fully understand what was happening between them, but one thing was clear. Mara's presence had begun to reshape his quiet world in ways he never expected. And though he was shy, though he feared change, a small part of him hoped she wouldn't leave anytime soon. The sky had grown darker than usual that afternoon. Heavy clouds drifted across the horizon, thick and gray, hinting at a storm. Ethan stood near the barn, staring up with worry in his eyes. The barn roof had been giving him trouble for weeks, but he always put off fixing it. Now, with the storm approaching fast, he knew waiting wasn't an option anymore. Mara walked toward him carrying a wooden crate. "Storm's coming," she said, glancing at the sky. "Yeah," Ethan replied quietly. "The barn roof might not survive it." Mara followed his gaze to the loose boards on top of the barn. She knew he was right. The roof creaked, even on calm days. A heavy storm could damage it badly. "Let me help," she said immediately. Ethan shook his head. No, it's too risky. I'll just patch it quickly." "You stay inside the cabin," Mara raised an eyebrow, her expression half amused, half firm. Ethan, I've handled storms worse than this. I'm not staying inside while you climb up there alone. But Ethan started to speak, but she had already turned toward the barn. He sighed softly. He knew better than to argue with her when she made up her mind. Still, worry settled deep in his stomach. He was used to danger on the ranch animals, tools, weather, but he wasn't used to feeling scared for someone else's safety. They reached the barn just as the wind began to blow harder. Leaves scattered across the ground. The horses inside the barn shifted nervously, sensing the coming storm. We need to be quick, Ethan said, grabbing the ladder and leaning it against the barn wall. Mara nodded. I'll hand you the tools from below. Ethan started climbing the ladder, holding a hammer in one hand. He was steady but cautious, each step slow. He didn't like heights much, and his hands always got shaky when he climbed too high. Mara noticed immediately. Ethan, are you okay? She called up gently. I'm fine, he answered, though his voice was tight. When he reached the top, he knelt carefully and inspected the loose board. The wind blew stronger now, making the old wood groan. Ethan tried to stay focused, but the rattling noises and the swaying of the ladder made him nervous. He hammered in the first nail, but the wind pushed him slightly off balance. Mara stepped closer. Ethan, maybe we should wait. This storm might be stronger than we think. No, he replied quickly. If we wait, the roof could break tonight. The animals need protection. Mara understood, but she couldn't help worrying. She watched him closely, ready to act if anything went wrong. Ethan moved along the edge of the roof, trying to secure the next board. But a sudden gust of wind hit him hard. His body jolted, and his knee slipped a little on the wet surface. Ethan! Mara shouted, stepping forward instinctively. I'm fine, he said again, but this time his voice trembled. She didn't believe him. He looked pale, his hands shaking. She took another step, closer to the ladder. Don't come up, he said quickly, his breath catching. Please, don't do that. He didn't say it out of anger or annoyance. It was fear. Fear that she might slip, fall, or get hurt because of him. Ethan wasn't used to feeling responsible for someone else's safety. He didn't want anything to happen to her. But Mara misunderstood his words. She thought he was scared of falling, scared of being up there alone. She looked up at him with worried eyes. Ethan, you're shaking, she said softly. You're scared, aren't you? He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, she stepped onto a stack of crates beside the ladder, trying to get closer, to help him feel steady. Mara, those crates aren't stable, Ethan said, fear gripping his chest. But she didn't climb all the way. She only moved up enough so she was closer to him, close enough that he could hear her voice clearly over the wind. Mara, please, he whispered again, but she didn't stop. Instead, she rested her head gently against his shoulder, her forehead touching the side of his arm. It was a soft, comforting gesture, one that surprised Ethan so much he froze completely. She wasn't climbing to help herself. She climbed to steady him. It's okay, she murmured, her voice low and calm despite the storm. I'm right here. You're not alone. Just breathe. Ethan didn't know what to do. His whole body went still. No one had ever done something like that for him. He was used to silence, loneliness, and distance. Someone being this close, someone offering comfort, it felt overwhelming. The wind blew again, but this time Ethan didn't sway. Mara's presence made him feel grounded. He slowly exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing. Mara, I didn't mean I was scared. I just didn't want you to fall. Mara, she lifted her head slightly, meeting his eyes. The closeness made Ethan's heart beat in his ears. I know you're worried, she said softly, but let me worry about you too. Her words hit him harder than the wind. Ethan swallowed, his voice shaky. I'm not used to people being this close. I can step back, she said gently, starting to move. No, Ethan whispered without thinking. She paused. He didn't know why he said that. The moment felt new, strange, but somehow right. Mara stayed where she was, her head resting lightly against him. The storm continued to rumble in the distance, but in that short moment, it felt like the world around them had softened. After a few seconds, Ethan found his breath again. He continued hammering the nails, this time more calmly. Mara stayed below, steady and quiet, keeping an eye on him. When he finished, he climbed down the ladder slowly. Mara stepped away from the crates and met him at the bottom. He stood in front of her, rain starting to sprinkle down, his breath still uneven. "You should have let me finish," he whispered. "And you should have told me you were scared," she replied softly. Ethan lowered his gaze. "I'm not good with words." "You're better than you think," she said gently. There was a long silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. They stood under the dark sky, the wind brushing past them. Ethan finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For what?" she asked. "For being there." Mara's expression softened. "You would have done the same for me." He wasn't sure if he believed that, but her faith in him warmed something deep inside. They walked back toward the main house as the first heavy drops of rain fell. Inside the barn, the horses calmed as the storm outside grew louder. Ethan and Mara checked them together, making sure they were safe. When a loud crack of thunder shook the roof, Mara flinched slightly. Ethan noticed, and without thinking, he stepped closer. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Just, storms remind me of nights I'd rather forget." Ethan wanted to ask more, but he didn't push. He simply stood by her, offering quiet support the same way she had done for him on the roof. The storm continued throughout the night, but the barn stayed strong. After finishing the checks, they sat on 2 old crates, listening to the rain hit the roof. Mara's voice broke the silence first. "You know, when you said please don't do that, I thought you meant you were scared of heights." Ethan looked down awkwardly. "No, I just didn't want anything bad to happen to you." She stared at him for a moment, really stared, as if seeing a part of him he had kept hidden. "You care more than you show," she said softly. Ethan's face turned warm. "I'm not used to showing anything." "You're doing fine," she whispered. Another long pause filled the air, but this time it was gentle, filled with unspoken things neither of them knew how to put into words. As the storm slowly calmed, the ranch felt peaceful again. Ethan and Mara walked back to their cabins through the wet grass, their shoulders brushing lightly. Ethan felt the small touch like a spark. When they reached her cabin, Mara stopped and looked at him. "Good night, Ethan." He nodded. "Good night." She stepped inside, closing the door softly. Ethan walked toward his house, but he paused halfway and looked back at the cabin. Something inside him had shifted quietly but deeply. Mara had rested her head on his shoulder for only a moment, but that moment changed everything. He wasn't scared of her closeness anymore. Maybe, he thought, he had needed someone all along, someone gentle, someone strong, someone like her, and maybe she needed him too. The next morning began quietly on the ranch. The sun was rising slowly over the hills, spreading a soft, golden light across the fields. Wyatt stepped out of his cabin and stretched his back, feeling a peaceful calm in his chest. For the first time in a very long while, he did not feel lonely. He did not feel the heaviness that used to stay inside him. Instead, he felt something warm and hopeful. It was all because of Clara. He walked toward the main barn, expecting to find her working as usual. But when he reached the door, he saw her standing alone outside. She was looking at the landscape with an unreadable expression. The gentle wind lifted her hair, and her shoulders were rising and lowering with each deep breath she took. She looked peaceful, but Wyatt sensed that something was on her mind. He approached her quietly, not wanting to startle her. She turned when she heard his footsteps, and a faint smile touched her lips. There was a softness in her eyes that he had become used to, but today, it seemed mixed with something else, maybe worry, maybe hesitation. "You're up early," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "I couldn't sleep much," she replied honestly. "Too many thoughts." Wyatt nodded. He knew that feeling too well. Good thoughts? I hope? Her smile grew a little. Some good. Some confusing. He stuffed his hands into his pockets, suddenly unsure how to respond. Talking about feelings was never easy for him. He had kept things inside for many years, and expressing himself always felt like carrying a heavy box, without knowing where to set it down. Clara noticed his silence and stepped a little closer. Wyatt, she said gently, I need to ask you something. His heart gave a small jump. Go ahead. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Yesterday, when I rested my head on your shoulder, did it make you uncomfortable? I know you told me not to do it at first, but then you didn't move away. I don't want you to feel uneasy around me. Wyatt felt heat rise to his face. He looked away, embarrassed but also touched that she cared so much about his feelings. It wasn't that I was uncomfortable, he admitted. I just wasn't used to anyone being that close. It surprised me. She searched his expression. But did you mind? He shook his head slowly. No. Actually, it felt nice. A long, quiet moment passed between them. Clara let out a soft breath, as if she had been holding it the whole time. The early sunlight reflected gently off her eyes, making them shine. I'm glad, she said. They stood side by side, watching the ranch slowly wake up. Horses grazed in the distance. Birds fluttered across the sky. Somewhere near the barn, a rooster crowed late as usual, making Clara laugh a little. But even as she laughed, Wyatt sensed she was holding back something more. Clara, he said softly. There's something else, isn't there? She looked down at her feet. Yes. His chest tightened. He had expected this someday, but it still stung. Leaving? He asked carefully. I'm not sure yet, she said. This ranch helped me heal in ways I didn't expect. But sometimes I feel like I'm living in a place where I don't fully belong. People in town still whisper about me. They still stare. I'm strong enough to ignore it most days, but not always. Wyatt listened quietly. He understood too well what it felt like to be judged or misunderstood. Do you want to go? He asked. That's the problem, she whispered. I don't know. They walked slowly toward the corral, letting the conversation flow naturally. Clara talked about her late husband, the memories she carried, the fears she still had about letting anyone get too close. Wyatt listened without interrupting. He didn't offer empty promises or dramatic speeches. He simply walked beside her, showing she wasn't alone. At one point, Clara stopped walking. She looked at Wyatt with an expression that was both hopeful and uncertain. If I stay, she asked quietly, will you be okay with that? Wyatt blinked in surprise. Of course I would. I mean, she clarified. Would you want me to stay? Or are you just being polite? Wyatt took a deep breath. Words felt heavy again. But this time, he forced himself to let them out. I want you to stay, he said plainly. I like having you here. I like talking to you. Working with you. I feel better with you around. The ranch feels less empty. I feel less empty. Her eyes softened, and she nodded slowly, as though she had been waiting a long time to hear something like that. I feel the same, she said quietly. Being here with you. It reminds me that life can still move forward. They continued working around the ranch that day, but their connection felt deeper, calmer, more open. Every small interaction carried more meaning, sharing tools, repairing fences together, taking breaks in the shade, exchanging light jokes. It was as if they were learning a new rhythm, one that belonged to both of them. By afternoon, the sky shifted, and light clouds drifted over the hills. Clara stood near the porch with a thoughtful look. Wyatt walked up with 2 glasses of cold lemonade he had made awkwardly, but proudly. She took one glass and smiled. Thank you. As they stood there, sipping the lemonade, she leaned lightly, not fully, just a little against his arm. This time he did not freeze. He didn't shift away. He let himself relax into the moment. It felt natural. After a while, Clara spoke softly. Wyatt, can I ask one more thing? Anything, he said. When I rested my head on your shoulder yesterday, you told me not to do it because you weren't ready. But if I did it now, would you still say the same? See, Wyatt felt his heart beat a little faster. But for the first time, he didn't try to hide it. No, he said, I wouldn't. Clara moved closer, resting her head gently against his shoulder, not in a dramatic way, not in a rushed way, but in a calm, peaceful way. Wyatt let out a quiet breath and allowed himself to lean back just a little so she could stay comfortable. They stood that way for a long time, watching the ranch, listening to the soft sounds of nature, letting the silence speak for them. In that simple moment, there were no fears, no doubts, no questions about the future. There was only understanding, two people who had been broken in different ways but were healing together, slowly and honestly. Clara lifted her head slightly, not breaking the closeness but looking up just enough to meet his eyes. So, she asked softly, does this mean I should stay? Wyatt gave a small, genuine smile, the kind he didn't give very often. Yes, he said. Stay. Clara returned the smile, gentle and full of relief. She rested her head on his shoulder again. And this time, Wyatt didn't say, please, don't do that. He simply let her be there because now he understood that sometimes the quiet closeness of another person is not a burden at all. It is a blessing.